Is Maru washed up? Is Terran underpowered? And can you jump over 3 goats stacked upon one another? All of these questions will be answered in today's episode of Starcraft Today.
Starcraft Today. Your favorite Starcraft news show.
In the past week we saw the first games in Group B. Group B consisting of Maru, Dark, Hero, DRG and Creator. First match between the two group favorites, Maru and Dark. And in this first game, in this first match, we see an uneventful early game leading into a pretty bad mid-game fight for Maru, who from that point on is pretty much forced into a late game from behind. With constant run-bys and aggressions on Golden Wall, Dark forces Maru to eventually attack into him, and as a result, Dark wins game number 1. In the second game, Dark opens up with a quick Nidus attack that goes largely unscouted. Maru is not ready, loses 26 workers, but manages to hold. Maru, with a lot of harass in the mid game, goes into a late game from a much better position, in which after a very long time, eventually manages to grab the victory. In game number 3, once again, Darks get ahead, this time without much happening in the early or mid game, and Maru's kind of forced once again to go into a late game while being slightly behind. The first truly notable thing to happen in this game is a 6th Overlord link drop while attacking a planetary at the same time, taking out a bunch of workers. The game continues into a longer macro game in which Dark, quite frankly, just outplays his opponent the entire game and eventually collects a win as a result with some cheeky Serrals on a couple of Thors. The second match in this group was Creator versus DRG, and in game number 1, Creator opens up with a double Disruptor drop, but does not manage to deal too much damage. For a long time it feels like he's planning some type of attack, but he ends up just staying home. DRG is the first one to actually make a move and jump into action, and the way he does that is by peeing on a Nexus and taking it out. And once the next 16 Mutalisks fly into the main base of Creator, Creator, without much of a fight, decides to tap out and head into game number 2. And in the game number 2, DRG blocks Creator's Nexus, forcing Creator to delay it and get the core first. Creator doesn't really seem to care as he goes into triple Stargate Void Ray Disruptor Immortal. DRG plays a composition that feels like it should have been using a timing attack, but plays it a little bit more passive with more drones, Corruptor Roach Infestor. It does not really end up working, and after a couple of bad trades, DRG is forced to tap out 1-1. In game number 3, Creator opens up with multiple oracles, but doesn't get too much done. Transitioning into Colossi Blink focus play, while DRG sticks with his Ravager Link Bane composition, it feels like DRG just tacks up to his Hive Tech units a little bit too late, because Creator attacks at the 12-minute mark with 5 Colossi. There's not a single Viper out yet, pretty much leaving DRG's army no chance whatsoever and giving Creator the 2-1 victory in this first match for him. The third match in this group is Dark versus Hero, and in this match Dark decides to start with some aggression with a proxy hatch, 1 base spine rush all in. Hero does not scout and as a result just dies pretty quickly. The second game, Dark once again opens up with a proxy hatchery, but it's a fake proxy hatch, but also not a fake proxy hatch because it ends up finishing up. It's a really weird start that doesn't really do anything. Ends up going into a longer mid game. Hero decides to play his new style that he showed for the first time in this GSL group, where he stays on 4 gas for a long time after opening up with oracles, goes into Blink, Charge as kind of a mid-game composition, deals a lot of damage, but Dark manages to stay alive into a late game in which eventually Hero manages to take the win, break Dark, win with a Carrier Tempest army against Dark, who was defending with Infestor, Ravager, Lurker. Not the greatest composition, and so Hero takes that game number 2. In the third game, Hero makes it short. He says, I have enough macro games, I don't want it no more. Plays a fake third base Disruptor Gateway all in. Dark is not ready, tries to tech into Mutalisk, but it's not quite enough, and Hero wins the series 2-1. The fourth match in Group B, Maru versus Creator, and Maru having a very tough start, as he doesn't only lose his first SCV with the Proxy Rex build that he was playing, but also the backup SCV that gets sent across the map gets taken out. Creator, as a result, decides to just put on some pressure, and he kills Maru with a couple of gateway units and an aggressive pylon, a couple of batteries on the low ground as well, and Creator is up 1-0. In the second game, Maru opens up with a fake Proxy Rex, and although nothing really happens in the early game, Maru still manages to straight up kill his opponent's third base without much issue. He can't finish the game right away, but 2 minutes later, with more reinforcements, manages to grab the dub that he knew was waiting for him. In the final game of this series, Maru accidentally misplaces his first Widow Mine in his natural, allowing Creator's 2 Stalkers to take out a couple of Marines, which is kind of important because Creator was proxying a Void Ray. Maru, extremely unprepared for the proxy Void Ray and with less Marines than he should have had, takes a lot of damage. Maru tries to get back into the game with a cheeky SCV pool Marine tank attack, but it does not end up working out. Creator's army is simply too powerful and actually takes out Maru in a massive upset. That means that Maru is right now 0-2 in this group and in last place. As the final match of Group B, Day 1, we have Hero versus DRG. Hero opening up with the triple Oracle, following it up with a low-gas Gateway Man style. Lots of Stalkers, lots of Zealots. DRG not being ready for the blink into the main, or honestly the Zealot run by towards the third, and as a result dies versus the first real pressure that Hero puts on. In game number 2, Hero opens up with a bunch of Void Rays from 2 Stargate into carriers. He sadly, however, loses all of his Void Rays in the middle of the map. From that point on, DRG has a firm control of the game, and it's only a matter of time till he gets the equalizer in the series. Moving on to game 3, once again Hero opting for these early oracles into the Gateway Man style. This time, however, DRG is ready, holds the first attack on a low drone count with a very big army, and this allows DRG to counterattack and win the game, winning him the series 2-1. And that final match leaves us with an honestly insane standing in Group B so far. Maru in last place, 0-2 in matches, still needs to play against Hero, still needs to play against DRG. Hero who has absolutely mental TVP. So there is a real possibility here that Maru might get kicked out. Creator in first place and Dark in fourth place, but as he's sharing the same map score as both DRG and Hero, I have my full trust that Dark will make it out of this group next week when he has to play a couple of other people. Moving on to the second part of Group A. So last week we had the first part already, starting with Beyond versus Ragnarok. Beyond in game number 1 opening up with a couple of Banshees, getting way too many kills with both the Hellions and the Banshees, and just finishing off the game with some quick medevac tank pressure as a follow-up. In the second game, a little bit of damage was done with some drops, with some mid-game pressure. This allows Beyond to push with the 2-2 upgrade. Ragnarok could not get the fight that he wanted with the Lingbane Muta, and Beyond gets a relatively easy 2-0 victory. The second match is Ryung versus Trap, and although Trap struggled in the first week of Group A, here against Ryung he looked pretty dominant. Oracles dealing a lot of damage initially, forcing Ryung into a mid to late game where he's just not comfortable. He's really far behind. Trap eventually picks one big fight and absolutely destroys Ryung. In the second game, we see Ryung opening up with a 2-gas opener, following it up with a sneaky tank push, which went completely unscouted. Trap does get a lot of counter damage with the Blink Stalkers, taking out a lot of SCVs, and after a somewhat boring mid-game, Trap eventually catches Ryung slightly out of position and gets the 2-0 victory that way. The third match of the day is Beyond versus Rogue, and this is an extremely important match for Beyond, as if he loses this, he is out, and if he wins, he still has a chance. In game number 1, Beyond opens up with a quick tank push behind the minerals from 2 bases. Now, this is played on Golden Wall, which of course has a lot of tricks. Follows it up with a base at the gold and catches Rogue completely off guard with the initial aggression and manages to take an easy win on map 1. On map 2, he decides to play something similar, a couple of Banshees as an opener into a 2-base tank push. This time, however, Rogue completely destroys the tank push and gets himself a big lead. With some solid mid-game moves, Beyond does manage to get back into the game and even get himself a bit of a lead towards the later parts of the mid-game. But as the comeback is happening, Beyond is forced to pause because he has some massive wrist issues. Seems to be in pain, he's kind of shaking. and pauses the game for 3-4 minutes. After the game gets unpaused, he does not seem to have quite the same momentum anymore as he had before. Eventually gets taken out by Rogue in game number 2. And in the final game, game number 3, once again, Beyond in a really good position after hitting with a Marine Hellbat timing, sadly misses the target fire on one of the remaining morphing banelings and loses about 12 Marines to a single baneling. Extremely painful. What probably should have been a 100% win in this series ends up with Beyond getting knocked out with a 1-3 score. As the fourth match, we saw Ryung versus Ragnarok, and Ryung kind of continuing with what Beyond was doing and opening up with a 2-base tank push on Glittering and immediately rolling Ragnarok. The second game is rather uneventful, as the first real action is when a bunch of banelings explode on a planetary at a fourth base. So Ryung is playing mech, they trade back and forth. Ryung takes one big bad trade, and Ragnarok just managed to leverage it into a fast win. In the final game of this series, we see a big roach attack, which deals a lot of damage in the early game. Ryung not getting the damage with any of his counterattacks, as Ragnarok is always in position, and as Ragnarok stays in the lead, eventually Ryung kind of kills himself into Ragnarok's roaches and ravagers. The final best of 3 of this group is Trap versus Rogue. And in game number 1, Trap starts with the expo behind the minerals on Golden Ball, goes into a proxy oracle, which the oracle doesn't deal a lot of damage, but 2 adepts do end up dealing a lot of damage, follows it up with a fake third base with a charge lot immortal Archon timing and destroys Rogue, who wasn't exactly prepared. The second game is the reason why there's not a single pro player that likes 4-player maps. Trap scouts his opponent last on a 4-player map and as a result dies against the 12 pool because his scout wasn't in time. I have no clue what this has to do with Starcraft 2, but I'm sure glad we have a 4-player map in the most prestigious tournament in the world. Fantastic. In the third game, we actually get a real game again, and Trap, with some pretty fantastic control in a Disruptor, Stalker versus Lurker battle, manages to get leads, gets a lot of map control. Eventually, a big fight in the late game with lots of carriers, manages to win him the game and take out Rogue 2-1. Rogue looking upset, Trap looking happy. That leaves us with Trap, Rogue, and Ragnarok coming out of Group A. The second part of Group B will be played on Thursday. I'm looking forward to see if Maru is going to be capable of making it out of this group. Moving on to the caster Civil War, where honestly there weren't that many upsets. Perhaps the biggest upset that we saw here was Ratata taking out Creator, especially after Creator's fantastic performances so far in the GSL. It was kind of wild to see Ratata take him out. Of course, it's just the best of 1, but every other match that I watched, I kind of was like, yeah, that makes sense. I understand why this person won. Now, if we were to highlight one match and perhaps call it the game of the week, a good match would be Maru versus Cure, played on 2K atmospheres. What started as a pretty standard TVT quickly turned into an absolutely insane TVT, which ended up going into Battlecruiser Viking versus Pure Marine in a 34-minute slugfest. Absolutely fantastic game. I'd recommend everyone to watch this. We'll have a link to the game down here below. As I don't very often recommend TVTs, but this is one that I do give my stamp of approval. As always, we also had 3 ESL Open Cups this week, starting on the Sunday in Korea with Cure versus Hero in the finals. Hero manages to take out Cure 3-2, allowing him to get a second ESL Open Korean win in a row. Over in Europe, we saw Clem getting knocked out by Skillis, and I got pretty excited for the finals because of that, but sadly Hero Marine absolutely blasted Skillis 3-0 in the finals. It was not close. And for the 4th time in a row, we saw the Danish Protoss player MaxPax take the ESL Open Cup NA, this time around beating Special in the finals 3-2 in a very close series, but once again the Dane just a little bit too strong. So congrats to these 3 guys for getting the win. Moving on to the clip of the week. This week, Creator versus Neep, a very tight game on Blackburn, ending in a not so tight way, at least if you're Neep.
sitting on Neeb's army for so long. Neeb is finally getting up 2 of his own observers. I think he's realized what's going on. Oh, God,
Let's
Neeb,
go!
no! Blink is just a second late.
Creator! Let's go!
Absolutely wonderful clip over there. And sadly, that is going to be it for today's episode of StarCraft Today. But not before we answer the question. Is it possible to jump over 3 goats stacked on top of one another? And the answer is, well, no, not really. Currently, the person who jumps the highest is Christopher Spell from the US. He jumps 1 meter and 70 centimeters. An average goat is about 61 centimeters. You stack 3 of those on top of one another, you get about 180 centimeters. So you're lacking 10 centimeters, even if you're the greatest jumper in the world. So either you need smaller goats, or we need to get better at jumping as a species in order to achieve this. Well, that truly is going to be it for me today. Thanks everyone so much for watching. I hope you had a great time. I for sure did. I'll see all of you next time for a new video. Thank you and bye bye.